Glasses are a lot better than I am. Where the hell are you going?
To the airport.
Good job. Can we ditch this bus?
The Da Vinci Code is one of the strangest movies I can think of from the last 2 decades. Oh, not by the movie itself, though, yeah, the premise about finding the resting place of Mary Magdalene while protecting the descendants of Jesus Christ through clues left by Leonardo da Vinci is a little out there, but in just what kind of legacy it's left. In that, it shouldn't have a legacy. When it was released in 2006, it was blasted by critics and audiences, though still made a decent killing at the box office. And that should have been the end of it. A subpar religious conspiracy thriller that turned into profit and then disappeared from public consciousness. Except, it didn't. Even today, I still see it brought up and referenced, the facts analyzed and the fiction separated, and there's still debate over whether it is a good or bad movie. So why is that? Why is a boring, pretentious, non-thrilling thriller still referenced to this day? Is it because the book is still talked about today and the movie is a good gateway to a discussion about it? Maybe. Is it because of the controversy surrounding the movie and how it was criticized for trying not to be as controversial as the book? Also quite probable. Just like the movie, there's a lot of discussion to be had and conspiracy to debunk, enough for its own series of videos. And while I'm not going to go into a long analysis about the movie or book, I'll save that for people who can at least pretend they know what they're talking about, I will give my opinion on why the movie is still popular. That, even ignoring the controversy and historical accuracy behind the movie, it's still interesting. I saw this in theaters when it first came out, and while my 14-year-old mind especially found it boring, it did leave an impression. I haven't seen it since that first viewing, but I still remember a good chunk of it. I remember the dead curator, the run through the Louvre finding clues by Da Vinci, Isaac Newton's cryptic box, the albino monk, the discussions about the Last Supper painting, and of course, the theory that Jesus and Mary Magdalene were a couple and their descendants exist to this day. Which, truthfully, I can be on board with. And even if most of the movie is as lively as Jesus' empty stone crypt, the all-star cast really put their all into their performances. I mean, it's Tom Hanks in a thriller, something that rarely happens even today, and for the time, never happened. And he pulls off a performance for a casting you'd think would have been dead on arrival. Truth be told, I remember more about this movie I haven't seen in over 15 years than the most recent Star Wars movie. Or even a lot of recent Disney, Pixar, or Marvel movies. I think that's why it's still being brought up when so many other religious and conspiracy movies are forgotten after opening weekend. That it does give us something to return to. Even with the movie trying to be taken seriously, it still has its moments of ridiculousness that make up an identity. That, even with how dry and even collar-tugging the plot is, there are weird elements and strange decisions that would make anyone go, wait, did they actually do that? And check it out for themselves. So, in that way, I guess it's a movie to be viewed. It's not good, or even in so bad it's good territory, but you can tell the people behind it tried to make it memorable. And, in a way they probably didn't intend, they succeeded. It may not be entertaining to sit through for the entire runtime, but one thing you can't say is that the movie's forgettable. Which is more than can be said for its more action-packed yet criminally generic sequel, or its... wait, there's a third one? I literally didn't even know that until now. But whatever the reason we went to go see the movie, it was clearly set up to be a big blockbuster hit. So that meant the Asylum had to grab a piece of the action, rushing out their own version and titling it the incredibly blatant The Da Vinci Treasure. Yeah, kinda surprised they didn't get in trouble, like they would with later shameless knockoff titles. So you may be thinking, wait, the Asylum's really going to make their own religious conspiracy movie? They're actually going to tackle dark, serious themes like corruption in church leadership and rewriting history to control the masses? Pfft, of course not. They're not going to get serious and address controversial political and religious topics. Until their 9/11 movie, anyway. No, this flick has nothing to do with the actual movie or the book it's adapted from. But it does have everything to do with another certain historical treasure hunt movie. What do I mean? Well, let's start digging and see if Da Vinci's original flying machine blueprints would have left less of a crash and burn. Michael Archer, played by C. Thomas Howell, is a former anthropologist who has dedicated his life to the discovery of a lost treasure said to have been hidden by Leonardo da Vinci. After years of searching, he's finally come across documents that point to the fabled Shroud of Turin as the map to the hidden cache. And, with his partner, sets out to acquire the shroud and follow the clues it provides to the treasure's resting place. However, ruthless treasure hunter John Coven, played by Henriksen, is also after the spoils for his own collection, sometimes one step behind Archer, and sometimes a few steps ahead of him. It's a race around the world and against Coven's mercenaries to see who will get there first. Will Archer solve the clues and beat Coven to the hidden fortune? Are his intentions for the treasure nobler, or is this just a battle to see whose is bigger? So from that description, you may be thinking that the story sounds a little familiar. Almost like another certain treasure hunting movie released around this time? And you'd be right! While the Da Vinci Code movie wasn't out yet, and I highly doubt anyone involved in production took the time to read the book, there was another blockbuster hit to steal from released a couple months prior. You may have heard of it. The Disney and Nicolas Cage project, National Treasure. It is shameless how similar this plot is to a movie that was barely 6 months old by this point. The disgraced historian treasure hunter, the ruthless other treasure hunter that used to work with him, the treasure that's been passed down and added to the ages before finally being hidden by a famous historical figure, the map to said treasure printed on a priceless historical artifact both the heroes and villains are after, the cryptic clues that they must follow that lead them to other historical artifacts and landmarks, the ridiculously complex machines and traps that guard the treasure. They even utilize X-ray glasses to see hidden text and images on the map. Heck, this movie even beat out the real movie sequel by featuring a car chase through London. Forget the rights holders to the Da Vinci Code, I'm surprised Disney didn't demand a king's ransom from the Asylum for just how blatantly they ripped them off. Even for a studio whose modus operandi is to rip other studios off. I'm guessing that, like similarities between King of the Lost World and J.J. Abrams' Lost, they were just obscure enough at the time to hide from the all-seeing eye of corporate legal action. But it is hilarious how they managed to get away with an almost note-for-note copy of a high-profile heist movie simply by doing a find replace of American founding fathers with Da Vinci. I guess the movie truly taught them that the best way to earn a fortune is to steal it. But fine, whatever. This is an Asylum movie. We're not here for originality. We're here to see an idea pilfered from another movie, with a title trying to make you think it had something to do with that certain major blockbuster that hit theaters the same weekend. And how it's executed with the budget of a slightly used refrigerator. And with that in mind, the experience of having to sit through this movie is not bad. Not bad at all. There are even some moments I go so far as to say are impressive. For the Asylum anyway, but a studio that's not exactly looking to please the critics likely takes what they can get. One of the major things the movie has going for it is an element most other Asylum movies lack: momentum. With so many of the other movies we've looked at, there's little to no sense of progress. No goal, no growth, just long, meandering scenes killing time until the end of the flick. The Da Vinci Treasure, on the other hand, establishes a goal, steps to eventually get to that goal, and keeps the action going while the characters travel to their ultimate location. From minute one, we know that these characters we're following are looking for something, and we get to follow them as we learn what it is, and learn along from them where it is. It's progression, a reason for the audience to be involved in the journey, and something I'm amazed is so rare for the movies we've seen so far. I don't think we've seen this level of headway in a journey since War of the Worlds. In fact, I think this is the tightest sense of progression we've seen in an Asylum movie up to this point. War of the Worlds had a goal for its main character and stops along the way, but it was still up in the air where he was and how far from his eventual stopping point he is. With this movie, every point is laid out. Every stop is clear, every location is marked, everywhere they need to be is hinted at before traveling there, and every town and country is helpfully labeled with on-screen text. There's really a sense we're traveling along with the leads in the front seat, as opposed to being dragged along at the far end of a rope, not having time to catch up before we're lurched in another direction. I feel like this is a long journey I want to be a part of, and not one that makes me act like a bratty kid on a long car ride.
Are you there yet?
No.
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 On top of that, every scene feels important. Unlike so many other movies we've gone through, where half the movie could have been cut or scenes could be placed anywhere and you'd never notice, every action in this movie builds on the previous action. It probably helped the writers that this is a treasure hunt movie, so they likely had more of an outline to work with and to determine who follows what. Archer finds important documents, which leads to him figuring out he needs the Shroud of Turin, which leads to them going to Italy to get the Shroud of Turin, which leads to a massive shootout they need to escape from, which leads to them losing the Shroud, which leads to them going back to their base of operations to go over what they did manage to grab to decipher the next clue, and so on. There are no long conversations or sidetracks that kill the momentum. Everyone knows what they need to do to know where they need to go, and they do it and they go there. This is possibly the tightest pacing I've seen in an Asylum movie. Though with that said, the pacing may be a little too tight. While the movie remains focused on the journey, they don't leave much room for levity or character growth, something to help develop these characters and their world outside of treasure hunters looking for clues in and around famous landmarks. While a trip to Vegas would probably be worth any long period of travel, you're probably still going to want to break every few hours to stretch your legs and enjoy some scenery outside of just your car. And that's what this movie starts to feel like after a while. You're happy we're getting somewhere, but at some point you kind of want the characters to get distracted. Like having to take a side road to avoid the main antagonist, or walking around a location, seeing the sights, trying to find where they need to be, or even just telling a joke. Have Archer relate a funny story about his early days treasure hunting. That would probably be enough, and serve as some good character development. Instead, most of the movie is just people going places, doing things, and sometimes having a character moment before it devolves back into exposition. It's once again the feeling of just being here, then there, then there, then there, and so on and so forth. But also that you get to place a sticker next to every place you visit to get the free sub sandwich at the end. Still, if this movie is a speedy monorail that'll get me to my destination in 6 hours with no stops, and most other Asylum movies have been broken riding lawnmowers that constantly jerk and crash that'll get me there in 48 hours, if ever, I'm signing up for my Lilu Dallas Monorail Multipass. Speaking of exposition, these are again some of the best written exchanges I think we've ever gotten from an Asylum movie. Now, the dialogue itself isn't exactly Oscar-worthy, or even that quotable, but it's how it's structured that makes a huge difference in how invested I am. This movie was co-written by Carlos de los Rios, who wrote the original script for the Asylum's War of the Worlds, and he's proven himself someone who knows how to take long periods of plot dumping and make it sound natural. In fact, I think we've seen enough movies for me to finally buzz out a segment I like to call Good Exposition, Bad Exposition. Good exposition sounds natural, like dialogue these specific characters would genuinely spout to each other, because they're arguing about something or it's information not all of them know but need to. It also has to sound like it's something these characters themselves would say, delivered in their own way of speaking and with the emotions they would have in this situation. And most importantly, it has to be short and relevant, pertaining to the scene at hand without grinding the movie to a halt, preferably giving just enough to let the on-screen action and visuals speak for themselves. And if it can be delivered with something else going on, like while the characters are traveling to their next destination, even better, as it establishes transition and crucial information at the same time, greatly increasing how interested the audience will be. Bad exposition is information dumping that never stops. It's not interesting, tells the audience very little about the world or what's going on, sounds less like a character talking and more like a writer trying to be noticed, and breaks any rhythm or momentum the movie was trying to establish. Even good exposition that would have been interesting can turn bad if it's delivered by characters we couldn't care less about that just won't shut up. So writers, take note. If you have a lot of information to explain to the audience, try to work it into the world you've created. Make it sound like the characters are talking, not you. Add to the illusion, don't take away from it. Give us more of this.
Who would think that a historian would forsake all else for a treasure hunt? Oh, but what a treasure it is.
And not this.
The Nosferatu have deferred their seat to us.
We have not heard from them. They have not responded. They could all be dead.
Perhaps. And yet their absence creates the perfect opening for our clan.
This.
That's your wife? She came to the States on vacation with some girlfriends and never went home. Where'd you meet her? Standing in line at the Star Trek exhibit at the Smithsonian?
Not this.
We can't switch doctors in the middle of an evaluation. The DA wants us by 5 p.m. tomorrow. There are rules to these evals. Now, I do that, and the state's gonna think I've lost control.
Oh, God forbid you jeopardize another promotion.
Just following procedure here, Emily.
This has been your Screenwriting 101 lesson for the day. I hope you learned something, and hopefully one day we'll have more good M. Night Shyamalans and Christopher Nolans in the world. And fewer bad M. Night Shyamalans and Christopher Nolans. And above all, avoid preceding the deliverance of exposition through the absolute worst 3 words in script writing, as you know.
As you may know.
As you know.
As you know. As you all know.
As you may know. As everyone knows.
As you know.
As you know.
As you both well know.
Of course, all because the writing sounds natural and like something these characters would want to talk about, doesn't mean it all makes sense. Now, some of the logic the characters follow in National Treasure and the Da Vinci Code to decipher each clue could stretch around the moon and back. But I could at least follow along and understand how they reach their conclusions. This movie has a huge over-reliance on clues supposedly contained in the Shroud of Turin, And while some of them I kind of get, others, well, do you follow any of this?
What's this look like to you?
A spear.
No, in a religious context.
Looks like a carpenter's tool, like something to do with Jesus.
He had a different symbol.
Doves, a cross, apostles.
Which one?
The final bite. The symbol is Thomas.
The Last Supper.
Yes, exactly.
Some discussions, I don't even know if they're supposed to be about discovering clues or not. Archer goes on a long lecture about pinhole cameras and early photography and that the face on the Shroud of Turin is actually Leonardo da Vinci taking the first selfie. Okay, that's an interesting theory, I guess, but what does it have to do with anything? He makes a big deal about it, but it's never brought up again, and it doesn't tie into the current leg of their journey. Right after I say everything matters in this movie, we get a scene that could have been cut out and nobody would ever notice. I guess it's not completely worthless. It is an interesting idea, and it ties into Archer's obsession with Da Vinci, so it's something he would probably do. But why is it here? Besides to serve as filler for a 90-minute movie. On release of the Game Boy camera was the smallest digital camera on the market. Hey, that fact has as much to do with anything as this scene does. And to unnecessarily further nitpick, there's how anyone is able to learn about and discover the Da Vinci treasure in the first place. This is the same problem I had with movies like National Treasure, The Da Vinci Code, The Mummy Returns, or most Indiana Jones movies. If there's a group of people trying to keep the ultimate treasure safe and away from the greedy and corrupt, then why even set up a treasure hunt? I can understand if it's meant so that only one specific person or personality is supposed to find the thing, like Titan AE or Ready Player One. But when you're tasked with guarding a fantastical treasure, yet you set up clues for others to follow that lead directly to the reserve's resting place, you might as well be a security guard who hides the key to the bank vault in a nearby potted plant, then disguises that fact in a New York Times crossword puzzle you're not counting on even one person to even solve. Knowledge and capability does not equal worth or morality. The people you're trying to hide the treasure from have just as much chance of finding the treasure as anyone else. At least Treasure Planet has a self-destruct built in case anyone but Captain Flint found his map. And the eponymous One Piece was indeed teased as a grand prize for any pirate who could find it, and there was very little chance of anyone finding it. But when the point of the treasure is not to be found, a treasure hunt with clues kinda defeats the purpose. On the whole, if only one specific person is meant to find and or guard the treasure, I'm with Riley on this one.
Why can't they just say go to this place and here's the treasure, spend it wisely?
But if the movie is comprised of likable characters well performed by talented actors, I can be distracted from some of the more glaring plot holes. And that's indeed what we get. C. Thomas Howell returns as our lead, Michael Archer, once again proving himself to be the best name that could ever be attached to any movie, Asylum or otherwise. While his performance here isn't as good as War of the Worlds, I attribute that more to the change in genre and script quality. That movie was a slow-paced survival story, where he was the only person we saw for most of the runtime, so of course he had to act his heart out and display a mix of emotions never before thought possible in a man's face. This is an action movie working with a script that was probably written in 3 days and shot in a week, so there's less emphasis on empathy and fleshed out characters. But holy heck, with the table scraps Howell is given to work with, he turns in a 5-course, 6-star meal for our delectation. I firmly believe he's playing an historian obsessed with Leonardo da Vinci, to the point he has a tattoo of the artist's self-portrait on his arm. That he's engrossed in discovering the mythical treasure Da Vinci is said to have guarded, and his obsession has earned him disgrace and humiliation from the rest of the community. But he's still dedicated to finally unearthing the find of the century, and he'll do anything to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands, even if it means stealing priceless historical documents and artifacts before the other side does. And while, like I said, he's not as expressive or developed as his prior role, the reactions he does give are so lively and convincing. When he's resting in a car after a big heist, I believe he had a narrow escape from detection and certain death. When he has a gun in his face, I believe he's reacting like someone with a sense of humor would react, smiling and trying to alleviate tension. And when he's being beaten on, damn, I just feel every shot to his system. I see the gears turn in his head as he pores over every clue and unravels every step towards the treasure's location, and the barely contained excitement he has as he nears the most important moment of his life. And I can see his excitement turn to puzzlement, before switching to fear and concern as he realizes his ruthless arch-rival has beaten him to a vital clue. all with him barely having to move a facial muscle. And all of this is topped off with C. Thomas Howell's trademark and criminally underrated smarmy charm. That gives Tom Cruise's ego legitimate competition. Even if the rest of the movie was the most unwatchable garbage you could imagine, it would still be worth viewing just for the unrelenting effort C. Thomas Howell puts into every second on screen. I swear, if even a fraction of his coolness was somehow distilled into liquid form, bottled and sold for $100 a pop, with the elixir promising to give us the sensation of being C. Thomas Howell for even only a minute, I would be first in line with my money out. This is a man too good for the scripts he's given to work with, and he proves it with every raise of an eyebrow. But what's just as cool as getting C. Thomas Howell for the movie's protagonist? Lance Henriksen as the movie's antagonist, John Coven. Yes, the Lance Henriksen, king of A movies and B movies alike, whose resume includes working with Spielberg, James Cameron, Stuart Gordon, John Woo, Wes Craven, Paul W.S. Anderson, David Cage, and even Disney, among so many others, is the villain of the movie. Do I even need to say anything else? Isn't that enough for you to shut off this video and pull up the movie on YouTube? It doesn't matter if a movie is worse than a knife to the groin, Henriksen is the band-aid to make everything all better. Of course, now that I say that, I have to admit this isn't one of Henriksen's best performances. Oh, he doesn't sleepwalk through it. I think it's impossible for this guy to show true apathy in a role, but he does kind of give the impression he's doing it with eyes half shut. There's not a lot to his character. He's just the greedy, ruthless treasure hunter who also wants to find Da Vinci's treasure and is perfectly comfortable with killing Archer and anyone else who gets in his way. It's a perfectly serviceable performance, but it feels like it lacks most of the charm and uniqueness of a typical Lance Henriksen character. The fact he sounds like he's reading his lines off a cue card really don't help matters.
How you doing, Michael? You look like a deer in the headlights. What happened to you? Here, clean yourself up. That's a $2,000 outfit. You know what? Get over it. Every clue that you get brings me closer and closer to my treasure.
I'd say more, but he's not even in much of the movie. He appears maybe 4 times throughout the runtime, popping up just long enough to insult and abuse Archer and steal or attempt to steal the next clue, and then we don't see him again for another good chunk of movie. I don't know if the Asylum could only afford to hire him for half a day, or if they simply didn't know what to do with him, but in terms of Henriksen-ness, this role ranks just above his Super Mario Bros. Cameo. Still, the very fact that these Kings of Cool share screen space makes it incredible the camera they used in Self-Destruct trying to contain the raw awesomeness of their mere presence. And, let's face it, only Lance Henriksen could take any of these lines and make them sound cool and intimidating.
How does it feel, get up, to be losing your team one after the other, huh? How does that feel?
90% of the museums around the world are filled with the spoils of war. And that's what this is. A war.
Do you know he was a homosexual? He liked pretty little boys. I also think he invented the first vibrating dildo.
What the hell are you doing? Who's a good collector?
But he's not a good negotiator.
Holy sh! But then to round out the trio is Nicole Sherwin playing Archer's partner, Guila Perdina. And if that name doesn't ring a bell, I don't blame you. This is her only Asylum performance, part of only 20 acting credits over nearly 30 years, with probably her biggest role being Nurse on some episodes of Homeland. And watching her here, I'm frankly not surprised because, yikes. Even by Asylum standards, this is just miserable. At no point am I ever convinced she's playing a character. Heck, half the time I'm not convinced she even wants to be here. Nearly her entire performance is just her standing around, mumbling her lines, trying and failing to act like she's invested, while forgetting every other second if she wants a British accent or not. Sometimes she'll put on a smile, but it's an Emma Watson from Beauty and the Beast smile, one that says, "I'm not having fun, but I'm getting a paycheck, so might as well pretend I care." Half the time she doesn't even close her mouth, just has her jaw hanging open like she's doubling as the studio's fly trap. Suddenly, I feel the need to apologize to Ginny from Shapeshifter. Heck, while this isn't technically her fault, her character isn't even consistent. She's set up as some kind of uber-religious lady who doesn't want Archer going after the treasure because she believes it's sacrilege. Doesn't stop her from following him around the world, wholesale lifting a priceless religious object from a church and blowing away guys with a machine gun. This is a face-palmingly bad performance in any context. But also placing her next to C. Thomas Howell and Lance Henriksen? It's like finding an empty space between the Mona Lisa and the Venus de Milo and hanging your toddler's finger paint drawing there. Why didn't they cast this blonde lady as Archer's partner? Sure, her acting skill also isn't great, but at least she looks energized and happy to be there. Would have fit in a lot better with the other two leads. Instead, this is who they chose. Someone they're comfortable with sharing almost the exact same amount of screen time as C. Thomas Howell, and someone who looks just as dead on the outside as she probably feels on the inside. That is except for one funny scene, where she has to distract a museum guard while Archer steals something from behind him. All of a sudden, she reveals this bubbly, energetic side of her as she tries to ad-lib something to keep the guard's attention. It only lasts 2 minutes, but it's not just her finest moment, it's one of the best parts of the movie. I don't know why it's this scene where she finally decides to, well, act, but it's something we haven't yet seen, and it's sorely welcomed. Unfortunately, this is the first and last time we see the spirit from her, and she's back to the bare minimum for the rest of the flick. Yeah, I don't know what this actress does as her actual profession, but whatever it is, I hope she's much more proficient at it than whatever this is.
At least they spared your pretty boy looks. Just a few bumps and bruises. Sounds like Corinthians. I need to do more research. What are you doing?
We're gonna take the top off so we photograph the back.
No, we're not.
Yes, we are.
No.
Yes, we are. I'll be gentle.
You better be gentle. Ah, Michael, you're going straight to hell, you know that. You're taking me with you.
Surprisingly for an Asylum movie during this period, there are almost no returning faces. Probably because they were all being used or burned out by Dracula's curse. Besides C. Thomas Howell as our lead, and Brian J. Garland and Kurt Altschwager as Coven's goons, probably just because they were also part of the crew, everyone else is a complete newcomer, though some would appear in later Asylum productions. Alexis Zabolis, who plays Samantha West, has been in mostly stuff, including the cult classic Plaguers, that also featured Steve Railsback and Bobby James from other Asylum movies, and her most prominent role to date was probably on the soap opera web series Divinity. Riza Riazi, who was Goon in Helicopter, is a prolific documentary producer, including working with Morgan Freeman, and he had a short run with the Asylum after this. Antonio Jaramillo, who played Bob Griffey, has a bit of a prolific television career, including appearances on Shades of Blue, Meet the Browns, Dallas, and Mayans MC. And to Rockstar Games fans, he may be most famous for voicing Javier Escuela in the first Red Dead Redemption game. AJ Castro, who plays Amal, has also had a long TV and voiceover career, including a recurring bit on Henry Danger and doubling for John Cena in several WWE games. He also has a resume that involves working with Rockstar Games, including Grand Theft Auto 5, Red Dead Redemption, and patrolman Max Faber in L.A. Noire, making him the third Asylum actor featured so far to also be connected to that game. We'll fill out the cast list one of these days, just you wait. And in case you were worried you'd forget any of the characters' names, the movie has you covered with these pop-out Suicide Squad-style bios whenever someone's introduced. Which, hey, handy, and conveys the cartoonish heist movie aesthetic nicely. You know, if anything else in the movie had this style. Which it doesn't. Meaning these bios match the rest of the action like a business jacket and a Speedo. Actually, that is one of the main problems I have with the movie. It takes itself way too seriously. Don't get me wrong, both National Treasure and the Da Vinci Code are enjoyable because they take themselves too seriously. But it's in all the goofy, unlikely theories and clues they come up with that they expect us to take seriously that makes them so much fun. This movie, on the other hand, is stuck on one or two clues and theories, which it very quickly runs into the ground. And the explanations get so convoluted, they cross the line from being unintentionally funny to plain confusing. I don't know, I feel like this movie really needed to B-movie it up to keep the fun going. Like, what if our heroes had to battle a clockwork automaton that Da Vinci built to guard the treasure? Or what if the treasure turned out to be the very first atomic bomb that Da Vinci hid away in fear of its power being exploited, and our heroes had to stop Coven from blowing up the Vatican? They obviously don't care that they're blatantly stealing from other conspiracy treasure hunt movies. Why care about how much sense they're making? This is from the writers of Max Knight Ultra Spy. Cheese things up a little. But maybe it's because they took things so seriously that this movie looks like it does. The scope of this movie is huge. It legitimately feels like we're on an adventure around the world, stopping in England, Italy, Afghanistan, and all the towns and landmarks they're in. Even though it's all obviously shot in California, they do such a good job of matching their footage with the establishing stock B-roll, I wouldn't have known they didn't actually visit these countries if I hadn't read the credits. They even made sure to include European license plates on the cars. That's dedication to detail right there. And everywhere they go, looks incredible. We get big houses, big churches, big airplane hangars, and big chase scenes both on foot and in cars. There are possibly more outdoor shots in this movie than any other Asylum flick, and it's all so varied and beautiful to look at. Even the scenes of them running through London take place on a crowded street, really adding to the realism and looking a lot better than an empty block they cordoned off for an hour to film in. It's so much of a contrast to the claustrophobic sets and empty rooftops and backrooms the majority of most other Asylum movies are shot in. Obviously, they did take shortcuts, same storefronts they run by several times, but for the Asylum, this is damn impressive, and I'm surprised the movie's budget could cover all of this. I guess the higher-ups had to forego their Starbucks for a few days to afford some of these shots. Oh, the sacrifices that must be made for art. Even the stunts are scaled up to match the movie's scope. There's the aforementioned chase through crowded streets as our heroes run from goons with guns. There's a shootout involving a desert car, a helicopter, and automatic weapons. But in my opinion, the best stunt is this car chase through London, where our heroes must avoid Coven's goons while protecting a very important clue. Sure, it obviously takes place on a closed course they could only reserve very late at night, and the camera and editing aren't the best, but just to see these shots and stunts in an Asylum movie is mind-blowing. I'm just amazed they were able to pull any of this off, and make it look this good and convincing with their time and money crunch. Goes to show how far the studio has come since Wildflower. And just when you get sick of watching two cars continually make more left turns around the same closed circuit than NASCAR, double-decker bus.
A double-decker bus?
Yep, they throw a big red bus into the mix, with Archer on the top deck having to go one-on-one with a heavyset goon while his partner tries to keep the bus steady. God, I love this movie! Again, the camera and editing aren't great, but just the thrill of seeing these feats from a studio whose action shots are usually on or below par with the guy from Harlem, it's a beautiful thing to behold. And any chase that ends with the bad guys running themselves over is clearly doing something right. The sound editing is surprisingly really good, especially with all the different locations and outdoor areas they had to shoot in. I didn't detect any major glitches or fluctuations in sound quality or volume. Everyone sounds the same whether they're in a busy train station or downtown Turin, Italy, with no obvious cuts to ADR. Sure, there's some reverb when they're inside, but it's not overpowering and it adds to the movie's ambiance, which is also really good and fits every location perfectly. All the sound effects they use also sound quite good, and they manage to fit each one with the appropriate action while refraining from using the more overused and distracting sound effects. All except for the gun blasts. Whenever someone shoots a gun, it's much louder than everything else, sometimes even blowing out the volume threshold and, needless to say, being really painful to listen to. But compared to other Asylum movies where I'm constantly fighting with the volume control, it's tolerable. The music's not bad either. Most of it is some kind of thumping techno beat that matches the fast-paced action on screen, with calmer scenes incorporating acoustic guitar and even some tribal drums. It all sounds taken from a library, but Mel Lewis is once again credited with the music, so I don't know what to think. I'm pretty sure I've heard these tracks before, and I have heard that the Asylum is notorious for recycling their soundtracks, but it's all so generic I can't place anything. Better than the guitar noodling from Roller Gator, I guess. The camera work varies in quality, sometimes remaining still, sometimes professionally tracking the actors, and other times evolving into a blurry mess that contrasts with the stock B-roll. Not to mention the unhealthy obsession with close-ups the camera operator seems to have that will often lose the characters meant to be in frame, though it's nowhere near as bad as Evil Eyes. I am impressed with a lot of the tracking shots. Though after seeing Dracula's Curse, it kind of hurts going back to mostly amateur hour with handhelds. Which is odd because Stephen Parker was the cinematographer for both movies. So it may just be the change from indoor to outdoor locations and the rush to get the shots completed before their filming permits expired. Which is a shame. If we had the cinematography from that movie involved with this one, I think we would have had the best looking Asylum movie in their entire catalog. But what they did shoot, I think is passable enough, and even the shakiness fits the action tone a lot more than a psychological horror movie, so well done. even with someone clearly forgetting that they drive on the other side of the road in Britain, so shots had to be flipped, resulting in obviously reversed license plates. Is that the cinematographer's fault or the director's? Whoever will take the blame. Not much to cover with effects. Besides the text overlays for locations and characters, and the usual muzzle flashes for guns, most of the effects are kept practical, including a helicopter model they blow up. There's barely even any green screen used, at least that I noticed, though the helicopter does appear transparent in some shots. And when digital effects are used, mostly for fire and explosions, well, they're bad, but just in typical stock effects bad, so they're not even worth a boo. A mixture of both is used when our heroes are braving the traps of Da Vinci's treasure tomb, and while I'm not gonna pretend they look good, they at least look solid, like something's there. I'm just saying, I've seen worse. No stock lightning effects or motion blur giant monkeys to be found here. But then we reach the biggest problem with the movie, which, as you may have noticed by now, is the editing. Peter Mervis, who also directed and co-wrote the movie, is back at the editor's bench, and this is his worst. This is his absolute worst. The entire movie is littered with artificial shakiness, jump cuts, fast zooms, still frames, smudge cuts, shaky layering effects, spin zooms, and worst of all, constant white flash transitions. Almost every annoying, unnecessary beginner's editing trick is featured, and rarely do 10 or even 5 seconds go by without another cut or jump to something else, making the movie really hard to focus on. Surprisingly, a lot of the slower scenes are kept relatively gimmick-free, with the occasional jumper flash, so there are points where the movie does relax and we can appreciate the characters and cinematography. But as soon as something even remotely exciting happens, it's right back to the machine gun editing of shaky images and frames that look like somebody randomly sat on the screenshot button in the editing program, all followed by annoying beeps and whoosh sounds that accompany every single edit. It's bad. Really bad. I don't kid when I say that these jumps and cuts are worse than The Surge. I know I can't take that back, but it's the truth. Even The Surge knew to take a break from the obnoxious Windows Movie Maker effects every once in a while. Here, things flash and transition so fast, it's almost like the movie's trying to mind control us, like those ARG videos some come across when browsing the weird side of YouTube. Which, if their subliminal message was to make me hate watching this movie and take back nearly every good thing I had to say about it, hey, mission almost accomplished. Look, I don't know Pete Mervis. Maybe he's a good guy in real life, maybe he's gotten better with his editing in more recent years, but just judging him by the editing work he's done for the Asylum so far, he comes across as one of the most impatient, ADD-riddled, easily bored editors I've ever seen. Someone who can't just let a scene play out and speak for itself, and who thinks they'll lose the audience's attention if they don't shower them with the most irritating in-your-face transitions and flashing images every single shot. Thankfully, we only have to stomach one more movie edited by him, and I have a hard time believing anything can get worse than the bombardment we have to deal with here. It's probably the worst editing I've ever seen from the Asylum, and if I hadn't seen worse camera work in other movies, a good contender for the most unwatchable movie from this studio. But with that said, I am happy that this is the movie that got the most obnoxious editing treatment. A fast-paced action film where things are supposed to be flashing by fast and things are supposed to be a little hard to follow. If this was a horror movie or one of the Asylum's kid films, then it would be one of the worst horror kid films ever made. But at least the editing fits the tone. At least the quick jump cuts try to make you think more is going on than the footage may be getting across. And at least the quick cuts to shaky images try to fill in the audience on what the characters are talking about. Plus, while the action scenes are stuffed with more of these effects than a couch crammed full of Thanksgiving turkeys, they don't play over conversations or characters speaking, so you can still hear every word spoken and know why the editor has suddenly pasted circles over the Mona Lisa. So while the editing is absolutely atrocious, I can justify it just enough so that it doesn't ruin the movie for me. Take that for what it's worth, but I still can't put it up there with Alien Abduction and The Surge as some of the most unpleasant viewing experiences I've ever had to sit through. Though it sure as hell tried its best. Oh, and parents, even though this movie is rated R, it's perfectly fine to watch with your kids. Unlike previous Asylum movies, there's no gore, no nudity, no drug use, no disturbing images, and very little blood and swearing. As long as you skip past some of Lance Henriksen's more colorful rants, this movie is just as tame as the one streaming on Disney+. It's so inoffensive, I don't even know why they went for the R rating, other than thinking it's the only way to get anyone to buy a direct-to-DVD knockoff. And even that theory would go out the window 2 movies later. But yeah, if you have the movie and you're worried about watching it around your 10-year-old, don't be. Let them plop down right next to you and push play. Just remember to have captions off and the mute button on standby whenever Coven's on screen. I don't want to give away the ending, since even though there's no major twist and they find exactly what you think they find, I do still recommend you watch this movie, and I don't want to spoil it too much. But I will address the fact that the heroes escape literally through divine intervention. Yeah, something happens, it's impossible that anyone could survive it, and yet Archer and his partner escape almost completely unscathed. I think the shroud has something to do with it, even though there's an entire scene dedicated to debunking that it's a holy relic, and yet it seems to protect our heroes from something they had literally no chance of escaping. Was it the shroud? Was it God? Was it just the purest distilled dumb luck that makes the people who surf down the World Trade Centers look like they won 10 cents in the lottery? Who knows? Just that the heroes wrap themselves in the shroud. Oh hell, they don't even do that. They survive the disaster. And that's what the movie decides to end on. It's such an ambiguous note to go out with, I wouldn't be surprised if the ending was secretly guest written by Terrence Malick. I guess it's all up to us, the audience, to interpret what just happened. Divine intervention, dumb luck, or just really lazy screenwriting. Take your pick, and keep it to yourself. This movie's not worth the argument in the comments. You know what? This movie's not bad. Not great, especially when it comes to its editing and plot holes, but with its inventive, though unoriginal story, its decent stunt work and outdoor filming, and its tidily paced and exciting plotting, this is a pretty entertaining watch. I'm really impressed with the size and scope of this movie, featuring shots and locations the Asylum didn't have to pull off and yet decided to utilize to make this their biggest looking film to date. And, need we forget, it features a competition between the legendary C. Thomas Howell and Lance Henriksen, whose names alone are worth the DVD asking price. Yes, the obnoxious editing effects make this hard to sit through at times, many times, but I applaud the studio for trying something new. Something they didn't have to do, yet went for it and, for the most part, succeeded. Does it stand with the theatrical releases it's copying from? Oh god, no. But for an Asylum movie, it's surprisingly entertaining and ambitious, sitting proudly as some of the studio's best work. If you can stomach the frenzied editing effects and can get past that it's a blatant low-budget copy of other treasure hunt movies, I'd recommend giving it a watch. Find your own copy, or one of the streaming platforms it's hosted on, check it out for yourself, and see if you've also uncovered a legendary hidden treasure. Alright, it was nice to cover something other than a horror movie this week. And next on the chopping block we have another horror movie. One where I've been dreading the day I'll eventually have to get to it. Will my mind be changed and it'll turn out to be a hidden gem that'll renew my faith in Asylum horror movies? I doubt it, but tune in next time to find out. Hey there everyone, thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, please consider supporting me on Patreon and help me create even more content like this. It's only $1 to get early access to my videos, and only $5 gets you a credit at the end of each of those videos, with higher tiers offering these and even more perks. And as you help me reach certain goals, I have super special content lined up for all of you. Head on over and check out my Patreon today, and I'll see you next time.